Welcome to Chick Chat with Unapologetically Karen, the podcast for women by women. I'm Karen Webb, architect, author, entrepreneur, creative junkie, and your host. Chick Chat is your resource for building your big, bold, and beautiful feminine life. So join me for some eye-opening and jaw-dropping dialogue that has people talking. Welcome back to Chick Chat, everyone. I am here today with my guest, Jennifer Arthurton. She is the creator of Old Chicks Know Shit, a podcast and community designed to support and inspire midlife women in creating their kick-ass next chapter. In the year leading up to her 50th birthday, she found herself divorced, an unemployed corporate executive, an empty nester, and bedridden with a stress-related illness. Every identity that defined her was taken away from her, and she realized that she didn't know what she wanted for her life. After throwing herself a big old pity party, which we can all relate to, right? She realized that in spite of the cultural narrative that 50 is the beginning of the end, yikes, she had a 30 to 40-year chapter ahead of her that could create a life that she loved on her terms. Welcome to Chick Chat, Jennifer.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, boy, that's a lot at 50 to just land with all that. So tell us a little bit about what happened when you found yourself at 50 in that kind of mess, let's call it.
Yeah. So in a relatively short space of time in the year leading up to my 50th birthday, my daughter went away 3 hours to go to school. My husband and I looked at each other and were like, huh, who are you?
Oh boy.
And,
Yes.
we ended up splitting. I got let go after a 30-year corporate career that I had given my all to. And at the same time, I found myself bedridden with a stress-related illness. Basically, I was burnt out. And
Wow.
it was as though every identity of who I thought I was in the world, so wife, mom, corporate executive, and even at the time I was big into physical fitness, but couldn't get out of bed most days. It was like everything about who I thought I was stripped away from me. And I was left with this feeling that I did not know who I was. If I wasn't wife, mom, corporate executive, then who was I? Who was the woman underneath it all? And it was really
huge identity crisis, right?
Huge identity crisis.
Huge. Yeah.
It was really scary to realize that I had no idea who I was. And, along the way, it dawned on me that, as women especially, I think we are handed the checklist or the rules for life, like really early on. So it was like, go to school, get good grades, get into a good college, get a corporate career, work your way up the ladder, somewhere in there, stop and have a kid and live in a nice little suburban neighborhood. I did all of that. And I had checked all of the boxes along the way. And I kept saying to myself, like, okay, I did everything I was supposed to. Why am I here? But what I realized was I had never actually checked in with myself to see, am I happy? Is this what I wanted? So I had basically left myself out of the equation and was going by somebody else's rules and checklists.
That sounds so familiar for so many women. That's what's so crazy. Yeah. I call that the feminine veil that we're like born with, or, that society starts to tell us how we're supposed to be. And we do that so easily as women. Yes. Okay. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I did throw myself a big old pity party, as you mentioned, probably for longer than I would like to. What I recognize now, though, that pity party was actually grief. That was me, grieving everything that I had lost, because it all happened in a very short space of time. And I think it was also a very important part of the process, was allowing myself that space to grieve. But what I did in that grieving process as well was I kind of turned it in on myself. I kept saying, like, what's wrong with you? Like, everybody else's life is going along perfectly. How come everybody else can keep their crap together and yours is all falling apart? Right. And I think a lot of women do this too. We kind of take these circumstances and make them mean something is wrong with us. What I didn't realize at the time was this was actually the biggest gift I could have been given, because along the way, like maybe in the last 5 years of my corporate life, there had been this little voice inside me that was getting louder and louder, where I would find myself, in a boardroom, in a meeting, half listening to what was going on and thinking to myself, is this it? Is this all
I
there
so know.
is?
Oh my
Like,
goodness, I so know.
there
Yes,
has to be
absolutely.
something more, right? It's like, you climb this mountain, and I had given everything to my career, right, to get ahead. It's like you climb this mountain, you get to the top, and you're like, oh crap, I don't know if this was the right mountain. But
Absolutely. Yeah. That's like, it's so true. And I think at midlife is when it hits. And
right.
you're right. We go like, what's my purpose? And this was like, I think you have such high hopes and you do everything you're supposed to
Yeah.
do in order to get to this joy, you think, and then you're there and yeah, it just doesn't fulfill. Yeah.
Right. So I had accomplished everything I wanted to accomplish. I had climbed the mountain, but I still had this kind of hole inside me. But what would happen was when that voice came up, I would shut it down really quickly because,
Mhm.
I had invested a lot, like everything to get to where I was. And admitting that I was not on the right mountain was more than my brain could handle. And the second
Right.
part of
Right.
that was it scared me to death. If it wasn't this, what was it? And I had no idea of what it was that I wanted for my life because I had along the way become so disconnected with who I was, right? I was the wife, I was the
Right.
mom, and I was defined by all of the roles that I played, not by who I was.
Yes.
So
Hmm.
it took a lot. When life picked me up and said, no, no, sister, we're not on that track anymore. We're on this track over here. It left me reeling. Like I was in shock. I was in grief. I turned it in on myself. What's wrong with me? I bought into all of the narratives of what it means to be a 50-year-old woman. Like this was the beginning of the end.
Hmm.
I was
Hmm.
supposed to be riding off into the retirement sunset on the arm of a handsome man with a pot of gold under the other arm. And I was like, none of that's my
Right.
reality.
Yeah, and even just one of those things that happened to you, like just the divorce or just
Right.
the empty nest or your child leaving, those in and of themselves are huge. So yeah,
Yeah.
that they were all kind of together at the same time is overwhelming, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, you know how they say, life gives you like a nudge and then it gives you a shove. And if you're still not listening, you get the brick in the head.
There you go. Yeah, yeah,
Right.
I
I guess I
understand
have the
that.
brick in the head because it
Yeah.
literally, and looking back on it, if it hadn't been that drastic, I probably wouldn't have made the decision to blow up the life that I had spent so much time creating. Right.
Yes.
Like I'll be
Hmm.
honest and say like that, I wouldn't have probably willingly chosen that.
Right.
But like I said, it was actually the greatest gift that I could have been given when I got past it and was able to see that.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, I can relate to that. Absolutely. So tell me a little bit. So then how did you transition from that into what you did want to do? Where was like that turning point or that pivot that you made and how did that come about?
Yeah, because first of all, because everything that kept me busy in my life had been taken away from me, and I was basically too sick to get out of bed most days. Like I was at the point where I could go to the grocery store and do shopping, but I couldn't actually get the groceries in the house and put them away without having to have a nap. Like
Wow.
that's how,
Yeah.
I was only able to do very, very short walks. So I was really forced into this place of stillness where
Hmm.
a lot of time I was lying on my bed, staring up at the ceiling, going, okay, what next? Where do I go from here? What's
Yes.
possible for me? And, in that process, there were no distractions. And so I had to tune inwards. The only direction I could go was inwards and
Hmm.
started to build a relationship with myself, to finally start listening to my own voice. What was that little voice inside me saying? And to start paying attention to it, right? So I would do these tiny short walks to the park across the street from my house. I would sit under a tree. Half the time I'd just be staring into space. And
Okay.
then, little voices would come up and, like it would be write. And I'd be, well, okay, I don't really know how to write. I've never been a writer. I write corporate strategy decks. But then I started writing about my experience and just partly for my own good, but
Right.
then I was like, okay, maybe I should publish this. So I remember publishing my very first blog, and I had to sit on my hands for like 3 days not to go back and take it down, because I was like, why am I putting all of this stuff
Yeah.
out for the world to see? But then what happened was, where I thought I was very alone in this journey, in everything that was happening to me, other women started to respond and were like, hey, me too. Right. I can relate to that. I have that feeling. And all of a sudden I was like, wow, it's like this thing that was happening universally. We were all having this big internal, emotional, mental,
Yep.
and even physical transition, but we're not
Right.
talking about it anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And then that led to, the blog led to the podcast, which led to coaching. And I kind of just followed my instincts along the way. And a lot of that came from like really getting in touch with my own intuition, like
Mm-hmm.
what felt like the next right step.
Right.
Right. And just
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
building that trust in myself, because that was the other part, right? I realized I didn't trust myself at all, because my entire life, and this is so true for us as women, right? Our entire lives, we are taught to seek validation outside of ourselves. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
how does my body look? Is it physically pleasing to somebody outside of myself? What are the things that I do for other people? Like, I serve my family, my career. Am I a good daughter? Am I a good wife? Am I a good mother?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then our ability to have babies. So everything that we see our value in is something outside of us.
Absolutely.
And
Yep.
so
That's
being
very
able to
true.
turn inwards and be able to listen to our own voice. And I truly believe that this chapter of life is designed exactly the way that it is, so that we can start to hear our own voice.
Interesting. Yeah, that is really interesting. I can so relate to your story, because my empty nest did not happen at the same time as my divorce, but finding out that my husband at the time was cheating threw me into that same spiral
Right.
and more so about just not trusting my intuition then, because
Right.
where was it when I didn't know this? It took,
Right.
once I found out, it had been going on for 3 years and I didn't know that. So you're right. Trusting our intuition, I think, is the most important.
Yeah.
And all those other places where we find validation doesn't help us. It doesn't help us
No.
to really listen to that intuitive voice.
Yeah.
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 Very true.
The answer to every question we have is already inside us. And our job is really to
Mm-hmm.
be able to tune in and listen to our own voices. But unfortunately, we're not told that. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're not
Yeah,
taught
that's
that.
very true.
I think more kids these days, especially girls, are being taught that at an earlier age. But definitely in our generation, it was just not
Right.
something that was discussed, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So when you say that it is, midlife then has the potential to be the best chapter, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
Tell me a little more how that works out.
Yeah. So I truly believe that this is the most powerful point of our lives yet. So first of all, I want to say that this is actually the longest chapter of our lives. So if you think about the sections of womanhood, or, the trajectory of womanhood, maiden, mother, and then generally it goes to crone. I like to insert maven in there, because to me, crone was like, this wizened old woman who sat on the mountaintop spouting wisdom to the world before
Right.
she left. And I was like, well, what happens to when you no longer, like when your kids leave home and you become an old woman on the mountaintop? Like, there's a big gap there.
Right, exactly.
So I've coined the term for that, maven, because if you look at the dictionary definition of the word maven, it means an expert with knowledge and wisdom to share.
There you
And
go.
that feels
Okay.
very appropriate for all of the knowledge and wisdom and life experience that we have amassed at this time. And at the same time that we are coming into ourselves, like in many ways, we are more confident than we've ever been. We know ourselves better than we ever have.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, the things that kept us busy outside of ourselves are kind of like, those demands are diminishing a little bit. So our kids need us less. Maybe our career's on autopilot. Could be your relationship is either great or it disappears altogether, like whatever it is, but we're not in that building phase anymore. And when we start being able to pull the energy back from all of those things that kept us busy for all the previous chapters of our lives, right, we can now reclaim all of that energy and turn it towards what is true and meaningful and important to us. And I talk a lot about, this is the chapter of authenticity, where we get to be, we drop all of the masks of who we used to be, and we get to be truly who we are. And for some of us, we might be meeting ourselves, like me, we're meeting ourselves for the first time ever. And then for other women, it's like reconnecting with pieces of themselves they lost along the way.
Yes.
But in that place of authenticity, with all of that knowledge and experience and wisdom, when we start turning it towards things that we are passionate and excited about, when there are things that are meaningful for us, things that are true for us, the amount that we can give to those pursuits is huge. right? And
Right, right.
when I see women in my community all the time who are building businesses, starting charities, starting new careers, tackling, physical or personal development challenges, right? And these women are making incredible impact in the world.
Yes, very true. Right, because we're not doing this from this young kind of inexperienced place. We're coming
Right.
to it as mavens, like you say. But you're right. A lot of our energy went to other things before that we can now turn towards our passion. So
Yeah.
absolutely, that's a great way to look at this chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
definitely.
most of the women, so not most, all of the women pretty much who I see come through my community who are, creating amazing next chapters, they're not doing it from a place of, wanting fame or, money and all of this kind of stuff, which, don't get me wrong, absolutely nothing wrong with that. But what's really driving them is a sense of meaning and purpose, like wanting to
Yes.
make a difference. And that, like, I truly believe that midlife women will change the world, because that desire to leave a legacy, to create impact, to make things better is so powerful, more powerful than money or fame or whatever it is, because those women will, run through walls to get to that
Right,
thing.
right. Hmm.
Yeah. So that's why I
Absolutely.
say it's the most powerful chapter of our lives yet.
I like that. That's real. No, it seems very, very true. I hadn't thought of it that way, but you're absolutely right. It does come from wanting to leave a legacy, wanting to have made a difference,
Yeah.
as we realize our own mortality and where we're headed. Yeah, like this
Yeah.
is the time to make that impact. So now let's talk about the biggest negative for that part of our life is that dreaded menopause, which
Mhm.
most people, it's just so debilitating.
Yeah.
Unless you get some other alternative in there, it's like, it's so debilitating, exhausting, and you don't feel like your normal self. Tell me a
No.
little bit, how do you either see women go through that or recommend that women go through it in what way?
Yeah, I totally get that. I mean, it is a huge physical, mental, and emotional shift. Like, and it's
Hmm.
very
Hmm.
uncomfortable. Like, for me, menopause felt like a 2 by 4 to the face. Like,
Oh,
I hadn't
absolutely.
I hadn't had any real
Me too.
conversation about it. And when
Yeah.
it was happened to me, I actually viewed it as a bit of a betrayal. Like all the things that I was able to control previously, I no longer had control over.
Hmm.
And it's so easy to get sucked into everything that you're losing in menopause, right? Like, my body's changing, my face is changing. I'm getting gray hair. I'm not sleeping at night. I'm so tired. I can barely function
Yeah.
some days, right? And it's really easy to get focused on what we're losing. But I truly believe that Mother Nature didn't just drop us off the edge of a cliff and go, here, go fend for yourselves. Like,
Okay. Yeah, that would
right?
be really mean and cruel. Yeah.
Right,
Okay.
exactly. Right. But what menopause is for most of us is a pattern interrupt, right? So we're going
Mm.
along our lives in a certain way. And then all of a sudden, things that used to work and ways of being and how we showed up are just no longer working. And it causes us to have to rethink how we show up in the world. Right. Because, going through the menopausal journey, your tolerance for anything that isn't truly aligned with who you are is itty bitty. Like, it's
Yeah.
tiny,
Oh,
right?
yeah. That
You just can't.
right.
And
The
so,
irritability. It's that irritability that and
uh,
lack of patience. So that I know that
ex-
one was the worst. Yeah. Like zero
exactly.
patience. Yes.
Right. And what that's pointing to is where we are actually misaligned with our own truth, because it's easy for us previously to ignore it, to, pretend it's not happening, or to just work with it. But when we get to that point where, like, the fuse is so short, you're like, I can't tolerate this. And it forces you to make a change. And that's about realigning you with yourself, like with your own truth. What am I willing to tolerate? What's important to me? What's true for me? And it's like, we need that pattern interrupt to kind of remind us that, oh, things are not like they used to be. We are now stepping into a new chapter. We can't go backwards, just like you can't go
Hmm.
backwards from puberty, right? And it really is like a puberty, right? Like, no part of you is
Yeah.
left
Yeah.
untouched in this
No,
menopausal
that's so
transition,
true. Absolutely. Yeah. It's
right?
everything.
And it
That's very
really
true.
is about just aligning us with our truth. Like, what is working for me? What is not working for me? What do I want more of? What do I want less of? And
Yeah.
that's not to minimize anybody's symptoms, because it can be really, really awful. And there's, luckily now we're starting to have a lot more conversation about menopause and symptom management and lifestyle change and all of that kind of stuff. So that conversation is coming more to the forefront, which is excellent. But I think it's the perspective that we have on not what we are losing, but how are we being realigned to a life that really, really works for us. So, for
Interesting. Yeah.
example, in my
I see.
case, I've always been a very type A, highly driven, go, go, go. I was the person in the gym at 6 a.m. And before I went to work, I would work out
Mm-hmm.
hard. It was all like really go, 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 very aggressive. That no longer works for me. My body tells me very, very clearly that you can't do that anymore. And in the slowing down, I've discovered a relationship with my body that I didn't have before, a relationship with my life and my own desires that I didn't have before. And I had to slow down in order to
Mm-hmm.
find those things.
Yes.
So it really was a little bit of a course correction.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I can see that. And because it affects every part of you, right? It
Mm-hmm.
affects your body, affects your sleep, it affects your, weight gain, it affects your moodiness. I mean, everything. Yeah,
Everything.
everything. I know. So true. So yeah, that is very true. So when you work with people right now, so
Mm-hmm.
you coach them to
Yeah.
kind of reinvent themselves, right?
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that. So how do you find people make a huge pivot at this point, or do they kind of slow down? What have you seen?
A lot of women are making pretty big pivots.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the people who end up in my community and in my coaching world are women who know that they want something different in their lives. They know they don't want to continue living the way that they are. And there's kind of two pockets. There's the group of women who are stuck. Like, I know I want something different, but how do I get there? How do I figure this out? Where do I go next? So there's that
Mm-hmm.
group.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the group of women who have made a decision that I am going to radically change my life. I'm building something completely new. And those are the women that I work with in my mastermind group. So it's what I call the women we're climbing the mountain together, right? In
Mm-hmm.
a
Right,
pack,
right.
right? And it's like, we know we're doing something different. It's out of our comfort zone. We might be fearing, having all the fear and doubt and, not believing in ourselves. But when we're doing it together, right, we can, feed off each other's belief. We can have somebody else hold our belief for us on the days we're really struggling with it.
Right, right.
So those are the two groups of women that I work with.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, I can completely relate to this because it definitely hit me at that, right about the same age. I had been divorced earlier, but I just kind of went with that and tried to put my life back together. But it's at around 50 that I
Mm-hmm.
just sort of stepped back and went, what is going on? I had done everything right as well, done all of the kind of requirements of being a woman in today's society. And and you're right. You do get this sense of betrayal and a sort of anger, like, what the
Yeah.
heck? I did everything right. And this is what I got dumped on with,
Right. Right.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
very
And
true.
it can be really difficult to navigate, because we're also, we as humans, we love our comfort zone. Right. And when,
Always, yes.
right. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we're forced out of our comfort zone, like, of course, we're going to have a reaction to that, fear, doubt, I truly believed along the way that I was, going to become, the spinster with 19 cats living on the street. Because
Yeah.
I didn't know how I was going to make money if I wasn't in the corporate world. That was the only thing I knew. I couldn't see any possibility beyond where I was. And, when you look at the cultural narrative about what it means to be a 50-year-old woman, it's not exactly inspiring. Like, it's the reason why I started the podcast, because, mainstream media tells us that, for women over 50, like, if you see a woman over the age of, not even 50, over the age of 40, it's all about bladder leakage protection, meal replacement shakes, retirement plans,
Right.
waiting for the grandkids to visit. And I'm like, that's all well and good. But
Yeah.
that tells a fraction of the story of this chapter of our lives. And so I started the podcast because when I was searching for the inspiration about, okay, what's possible for my life? Where are all the 50, 60, 70-year-old women doing incredible things in the world? They have to be out there somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was seeking inspiration for myself. And then, I was like, okay, if I need this inspiration, then other women need this too. And that was the genesis of the podcast, was sharing those stories of reinvention so that we could all see possibility for our next chapter. Because for most of us, it's like get to retirement, and then it's kind of this blurry, vague thing. I don't really know what retirement is, right? It kind of is like
right.
when the credits start to roll in the movies, but then there's something
Right,
after that, but you don't really know what it is. And it's
Right.
because we have no frame of reference. We have no sense of possibility for what's beyond there. And maybe some of us don't even want to just sit around and play golf and, count our retirement plans.
Exactly. I mean, I would go nuts if that's all I could
Right.
do. I just couldn't do it. Yeah. Which is why, I mean, I'm an architect, but I do all of this stuff, all this women empowerment advocacy, as well as writing, etc., all of that. And creating this kind of sisterhood of women to really empower them.
Yeah.
That's all new reinvention. You're right. Because you do start to, something is missing, and you do want to
right.
Before it's too late, which hopefully is at the very end.
Yeah.
That you want to discover that purpose. You want to kind
exactly.
of reveal that to yourself. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think we put a lot of ourselves on hold as women, just stereotypically, of course, but we do, because whether we're raising our kids or we're, if we were married and our husbands are starting out with their career, sometimes we put ourselves on hold. So it is this beautiful time to, right, that is yours, really. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, they say, midlife for men is a crisis of identity. And for women, midlife is a crisis of meaning. Right? Like, what does my life mean? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why so many women start, seeking. I mean, you're the perfect example of it, right? Like, how do we make the world a better place? How do I give back? How do I use my experience to make the world a better place?
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And that's why I love working with midlife women, because when women connect with their purpose and find that passion, there's literally nothing that can stop with them. Right.
Yeah, it's very true. Yeah.
I mean,
and it is. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, in my own business, like going from corporate for 30 years to running my own business, there was many times along the way where I'm like, I quit. This is really hard. I can't do this. And I would quit for an hour. I would quit for 24 hours, but I would always come back, because I'm like, there's a huge part of me that says you can't quit. Like, this feels so meaningful and so important to me that I can't. So I come back to the table and I figure it out and I keep moving forward. And that's why it's so important to connect with that passion and that thing that's important to you.
And I do think that women at this age, I think another change that happens, which is for the better, I believe, is that we stop the cattiness, all of the, I think that we finally get to a point where we want that sisterhood. We want to empower one another. I know for me, just having been an architect for 30 some years, it's still a very male dominated field.
Right.
Women are only 17%. And I think that's why I turned towards really working towards empowering women, because it's a different relationship with women. The conversations are different. The warmth is different. The amount of opening up to each other. It's a whole different way to relate to people than men typically do.
Yeah, that is so true. I mean, women are really wired for connection.
Yes.
Right? Like, we are the gatherers and the nurturers,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
And I think and you make a really good point in that, as women, we're typically taught to see other women as competition, like in our growing up years. And then we get to the point where we're like, oh my goodness, this is BS, right? Like, I need my sisters, which is why I love my mastermind so much, because like watching women support women in this group to accomplish incredible things, it gives me goosebumps. It's just so incredibly powerful. And I'm so happy that we have this realization, because I don't know how many times in the last week I've said it takes a village, like for just about everything.
Yes,
right?
It does.
Like, we're so much more powerful together than we ever could be on our own.
Yeah, I sincerely agree with you on that. And I think that's probably why we're so open to it at this point in our life too. I think we're all similarly looking for that meaning and that purpose and that legacy or something that makes us feel like we made a difference on this planet. in some
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
Yeah,
Very
exactly. And even if
interesting.
that different, and this is the other thing I say all the time. I'm like, your purpose or that purpose in your life might not be this huge, grandiose thing. Maybe your purpose is to make your kids' lives better or, to do something for your parents or whatever it is. Like, it doesn't have to be a big capital P purpose, right? It's just
Right.
finding
Right.
what is really aligned with you, what brings you joy, what ignites that little light inside you and makes you happy.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
that, and it's
Yes.
about connecting with that. And unfortunately, that's the part that we lose along the way when we're so busy doing for everybody else
Yes.
and everything else. We lose that. Like, what is that thing that lights me up? Like, where do I
Right.
find
Right.
my joy?
Right. We've like lost that spark. And it
Yeah,
does, you do have to kind of, you know, you have to bring that, you have to fuel that flame again, really, at this
yeah,
age to go,
yeah.
did I even still have that? And then, yeah. And sometimes it's something completely brand new, like you're saying,
Mhm.
that really does ignite us. Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Um,
always say that, and I say this with my clients all the time: silence, stillness, and solitude. Like, that's the way we connect back with that little light, because that little light never goes out. Like, it's your pilot light
mhm.
is never out. It's just
Right.
really, really tiny. And when we can
Yes.
find the space and the time to connect back and to hear our own voice, that little light can become a huge flame, right?
Right.
But we just have to
Absolutely. Yeah.
we have to breathe some life into it.
Hmm. That's a great way to put that. So, if people want to reach out to you, I'm sure there are some of our listeners listening right now that are thinking, "I feel exactly what you're talking about," and maybe they're starting to hear that voice or want to hear it.
Yeah.
How is the best way for them to reach you? And then also, what do you do specifically with them to help them?
Yeah. So you can find me basically on all of the social media channels. So Instagram and LinkedIn is where I hang out a lot,
Okay.
under Old Chicks Know Shit. And that's KNOW, as in we know stuff. Um,
Yeah.
and also the podcast of the same name, where I interview women who have reinvented their lives. There are some incredible stories. Honestly, I get so inspired
Great.
by talking with these women. And then I do one-on-one coaching. So for women who are really stuck and, need to find that belief in themselves, want to get reconnected and figure out, like what's next, or maybe they know what's next, but they're struggling to get started. So there's that, which you can find out all about on my Instagram and my LinkedIn page.
Okay.
Oh,
Hmm.
and also my website, which is the same, oldchicksknowshit.com.
Okay.
And then there is my mastermind group for women who are focused on living their highest potential in this next chapter of life, whether it's creating a new business, up leveling their career, starting a new career, tackling a personal development challenge, who want to come together in an intimate group of women who are supporting, encouraging, and really holding each other to our highest
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
best. And
Okay.
so that
Great.
is an option for women who just need that support, want that support, want to be part of a collective. It's called the Amazing
Hmm.
Collective. Yeah, and you can find out all about that on either my website or any of my social media channels. I'm always talking about it.
That's perfect. Okay. Sounds good. Well, it has been such a pleasure to have you on here. I know our listeners are, I'm sure we have piqued their interest because I talk to a lot of them, and this is something that they all kind of struggle with. We're really at that
Amazing.
age, right? We're really at that age where our kids have left the nest. We are kind of looking to our spouse and trying to reconnect, if it's been a long relationship for some people, and really figure out what's in our hearts. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So thank you so much for being here. It's been such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed our conversation.